Hey, hello, howdy, how you doing? It's officially unofficial. Build 42 Unstable is out as of about 4 p.m. Eastern on the 17th. I did a shorter stream showcasing some of the major changes to the game, so I'll have that up on screen now, as well as linked down in the description for you to check out. For those who don't know, I was fortunate enough to be one of the testers during the pre-release phase, and now that our embargo is up, I can showcase a lot of what I got to test. Now, normally when I do these kind of videos, I just kind of ramble, but this time I have an actual checklist thanks to the IndieStone devs. So let's get right into things. For starters, this is the unstable release, not the official release. This is important to note because things like multiplayer aren't available yet, and other aspects like the crafting menu still need to be fleshed out and tweaked. Alright, disclosure out of the way, let's move on to the launch bullet points. I'm gonna try to go through these quick because there's a lot. Starting with the expanded map. New towns and locations. This is the new spawn location screen, and I love it. It pans to each city as you click on it, and even shows a few shots of the map at the left-hand side with a description of each town beneath the images. If it's one thing these guys don't miss on, it's the map. Build 42 introduces one new spawn town, Echo Creek, and two new cities, those being Irvington in southwest and Bradenburg in the northwest, which is that unfinished map that's been in the game for like a year now with the steamboat. Now those all look absolutely incredible, which was to be expected. The only downside so far is that there's still no Louisville spawn, though I'm sure we can just get that modded in by tomorrow. I'll try not to spoil the map exploration too much though, because that seems to be what people enjoy the most, so if you're looking for like a top 10 spawn locations or, any of that, you're not going to find it here. I will say, both cities are packed with things to do, and I highly encourage you all to spawn Echo Creek and make the journey down to Irvington. You won't be disappointed. There's even a massive lake in the south beneath March Ridge that's great for fishing with the new rework. Speaking of map locations, basements are a thing now, and not just basements, but high-rises exist too. Now, I didn't find any of those during my testing or on stream, but I did happen upon several basements, all of which were incredible. Their spawning is entirely randomized, so there's a chance you can find them in any house you go into, which is really cool. On stream, I found one in my starter home in the garage, and later on, I found another behind the house, which was really cool to see. The layouts are entirely randomized as well, so they should feel new every time. I'll be live throughout the week searching for the underground sewer areas, because that sounds incredibly exciting, so hopefully we'll find something there too. Next up is the new lighting, arguably my favorite addition to the game. It's phenomenal. I could gush about it all day, but it's probably better to just show you instead. There's dark spots now in some of the portions of the rooms, and not just at night, but inside buildings like the police station in Rosewood, but I love that because it really forces you to have some form of light source on you at all times, like a flashlight. That being said, the exterior lighting is beautiful to look at. On stream, I woke up at around 1 a.m. at a farmhouse, and this is how it looks. I love it. Again, one of my favorite additions to the game with Build 42, and they crushed it. Performance optimization was a big point of contention as well for this build, and I gotta say, so far so good. This was one I was really skeptical on because when they first showcased this, they only showed one singular cell and half the buildings weren't loaded with anything, and they showed like 200 frames, and I was like, alright. Now show it in an actual game environment, and because of that, we live stress tested this on stream. For this instance, I did Insane Pop spawns with Insane Pop Day 1 spawns, and an Insane Pop Peak Day multiplier with Peak Day being 1. If you don't know what that means, that's the recipe for 16 times Zombie Pop spawns. With that all set up, I walked through the streets of West Point and all the way over to the Louisville checkpoint. Now in West Point, I managed to get the frames down to about 10. But the Louisville checkpoint was a whole other beast. I don't want to make this sound bad because it's not, but I did manage to drop to 4 frames per second at its worst. This took me grouping up well over 1,000 zombies at the gate, though, and spam zooming out to max range. Something like this would have likely crashed my game before, and while 3 frames may not sound great, you need to remember that almost no one is playing 16 times zombie pop, going to the Louisville gates day 1, and then grouping them up while fully zoomed out. On average, I managed to actually stay around 40 or 50 FPS inside of West Point, even with the 16 times multiplier in effect, which is absolutely amazing when you consider that the same setup was getting maybe 20 frames a second with Build 41. It's a big reason I stopped playing anything with 16 times zombie pops, but now that those issues have been addressed, it's time to run it back. I'm excited to see how multiplayer feels with this when it releases, and we'll do another stress test then, but until then, I'm over the moon for single player Build 42's optimization fixes. Admittedly, I might have been one of, if not the only tester, to not give a shit about animal husbandry. I don't know why, it's just not something I'm all that interested in, but if you are, it's a good start. You can live out your Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley fantasies in Project Zomboid, and that makes me happy. It's actually pretty in-depth too. You need a pen, and to organize the animals in it. There's got to be an indoor area for them like a barn, feeding troughs, water troughs. You can cut grass with a scythe and then put that in the troughs to feed them, and you can even pet animals like sheep. In my stream, I spawned in Echo Creek and managed to find sheep and cows, all readily available to start messing around with. So if you're someone who just wants to get right into it, that's the spawn place for you. Next up, we have wild animals. You can use the tracking skill to help find deer, or you just can randomly run into them, which is nice. Rats can be found randomly running around the streets, like for example in West Point, I saw a few running around by the Gigamart, and I thought that was really neat. Nothing like bringing Paris to Project Zomboid. Using the tracking skill, you can find deer in the wilderness and even hunt them down and butcher them, which adds a whole new layer to survival. Alright, now on to fishing. I was very outspoken about the skill rework as well, given how rough foraging was, and I gotta say, I like it. It takes away an AFK method and replaces it with a pretty default minigame styled event. Just like in Build 41, you still need fishing line, but what's new here is that you also need a hook, and that hook needs bait. The normal tiny bait you could use before will work just fine, otherwise you can find tackle boxes that have bait inside them to use. Worms and maggots still work as well, though I'm not sure on the specific catch rates for all of those. The only bummer to this is that it does seem like spearfishing no longer works, which is a bit sad, but it's not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to balancing. You gotta remember that in Build 41, spearfishing was insanely OP once we figured out how it worked. You could spearfish at level 1 and catch a 90 hunger fish. If anything, I'd argue fishing needs to be tuned up a bit in Build 42 so far. Like at level 4 fishing, I spent a good 2 minutes or so fighting with a fish just for it to be a baby crappie that was like 8 hunger. I was just expecting a bit more with my fishing level being higher and using tackle from the Riverside Fishing Store, but I'll have to test out different baits and see if there's a major difference that I just missed here. Regardless, it's a nice change, and while you can't just AFK in your fishing huts anymore, it's not broken on release, and that's not overly tedious to do. The only notes I have on expanded lore so far are that you can read the newspapers now, which is pretty cool, I think. The car radios and TVs also play emergency broadcasts, which is cool, but honestly, I'm not much of a lore guy, so I didn't pay much attention to this. I'm going to lump environmental story improvement into here as well, because I don't really care too much about it, but it's nice to see them spending some more time on those small details. Not every change needs to be this grandiose, sweeping adjustment. Now it's on to the new building menu. It looks very similar to what the crafting menu is, and I'm excited to try it out more in a full playthrough. But for what it's got now, I'm happy with it. At the bare minimum, it removes an immediate need for a modded building menu like we've all been running in Build 41 for years now. It's got your basic carpentry stuff that's always been there, your walls, doors, windows, stairs, floors, all that fun stuff. But then you go to the skill breakdowns, and you can now build things like feeding troughs for your animals. In masonry, you can make brick walls or fire pits, as well as stone walls, which is really cool. In miscellaneous, you'll get major The Forest flashbacks, since you can mount skulls on sticks and even add coffins. I can see this being utilized a ton in role-playing servers, or even players who just enjoy that from a single-player perspective. The welding options remind me of the default metalworking ones, where you can build metal walls, stairs, shelves, fences, all that stuff you'd normally build in the endgame, and then blacksmithing allows for furnaces, forges, grindstones, and charcoal pits, just like the mod. This leads me to my next topic. Crafting, or at least the initial stages of crafting. It's about on par with what I think most of us were expecting, though I will say I was a bit underwhelmed by it, considering that this was the focal point, aside from animals, like the big selling point, and to me it just kind of feels half complete. That's known though, the devs told us that this was going to be continuously expanded upon throughout the Unstable branch, but I don't know, I was just expecting a bit more than what we got. That being said, it's a solid step in the right direction. Almost everything is tied to this, if you haven't noticed, and that's, in my opinion, why they disabled the ability to earn XP from dismantling things. It's all meant to push you to grind levels through crafting and crafting better weapons and gear, which is fine as long as it's more fleshed out by the time the full release comes. I do like that the crafting menu tells you what's needed for everything, including the level. Like, you don't have to guess for recipes, it'll just tell you. Granted, there are some that are hidden that you can learn through magazines or watching TV, but for the most part, the ones available off the jump are good additions. Mods like scrap weapons aren't really needed anymore because a lot of what that mod brought to the table is now in the base game. I think my biggest gripes with the crafting overhaul are just some of the game changes, like not being able to obtain XP by disassembling things anymore, or the fact that you can't earn thread for tailoring by just ripping sheets, and even when you do get thread, you don't get any XP for it anymore. Granted, a lot of this can be adjusted in the sandbox settings, but the base game doesn't allow for this anymore. It's all pushing you to spend more time in the crafting menu to level your skills that way, which is a really big change from what we're used to. It's not a bad change per se, it's just different. I just hope that it's in depth enough that we're not going to end up with just 1 or 2 items to span craft for each level and then call it a day. Improved agriculture and crops. Well, for starters, you have more to choose from than just cabbages and potatoes. And I mean that, I'm not just saying it. There are dozens of crops to plant, and there's seasons too. No more planting everything in November and having them live into winter to harvest. They'll die now, and that's a good thing. There's also like 50 new seed types. You can grow things like pumpkins, oregano, sage, barley, wheat, wild garlic. It's incredible how fleshed out it all is now. You still operate under the same scope of digging a furrow and planting and watering the seeds, but I'm glad to see the additions. This also pairs well with animals since you can grow and harvest wheat and then place that in the troughs for said animals. It all meshes together really well, and I'm excited to see some of the farming playthroughs coming out in the next few weeks. For this entire point, all I can say is, wow. It's so damn good. I couldn't rip the audio files for it, but please just go watch the stream and skim through it a bit. I played for about 2.5 hours with music on, and it's just incredible. I'd recommend about 2/3 of the way through while I'm in West Point for the stress test. You'll see what I mean. Player vocals, yeah, your character can talk now. Well, kinda. He can shout and he screams while he's getting mauled to death by zombies. Just another small detail that really adds to the immersion of the game. You can choose from a variety of voices on the character creation screen and even adjust the pitch of those voices, which was really cool to mess around with. New clothes, containers, weapons, and world objects. Yes, 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 and yes. Again, a lot of this is going to be better showcased in the stream, so I'm just going to point back to that. But there's new fanny packs, which I noticed right away, new weapons and tools, which should be a given considering the crafting overhaul and new skills. Things like fillet knives and bone weapons like bone clubs and other cool edgy shit like that. As for containers, there's items like a sheet sling bag that you can craft immediately once you spawn in for 1 sheet. I'm sure we'll find more as we play, but those are just off the top of my head. Better UI scaling. This should be obvious from the footage on screen. Before, Zomboid only scaled to 1080, and I have 1440 monitors, so everything on them was incredibly small, and I had to manually go through and drag the menus out to make them bigger and mess with the fonts and all that. But now, the UI scales to 1440, which makes my life a hell of a lot easier, so I'm happy with it. Randomized wilderness biomes. I didn't really notice much of this during pre-release testing or on stream, so I'll defer to others on this. I believe it's in the game, but I'm not quite sure what it implies. Basic tracking and hunting. I covered hunting slightly when talking about the deer, but tracking is a new skill that was added to Build 42, and I have high hopes for it. Tracking pairs with foraging since you have to use the search mode feature to find things like droppings, paw prints, feathers, shit like that. Those all lead you to finding animals like deer, which you can then shoot and butcher for food and crafting supplies. Improved gunplay. I love it. I love everything about it. For starters, there's a crosshair now. When you're not aiming at anything, that circle in the center stays clean. When you center over a zombie, it changes red. You have to actually aim now, which is fantastic, and as you level up aiming, your crosshair gets smaller and smaller. This may not seem like a big deal, but it makes weapons like pistols and rifles usable on day 1. Long gone are the days of using a shotgun until level 5 or 6, and then swapping to a pistol, only using the M16 at level 8 or 9. Granted, it's still not going to be super effective at those low levels, but at least you can use them now. That being said, the shotgun is still the go-to. I'm really excited to see what Britta's does with this new mechanic, so I'll be on the lookout for them. New seated animations. Yeah, they exist. I see them being popular in multiplayer and for role-playing runs, but other than that, they're a bit of a nuisance because standing up isn't instant, which is definitely going to get some people killed early on. Don't really have much to say on that, so let's just keep it moving. Corpse dragging and window chucking. The animations for this are dope as hell. It's also just a ton of fun to drag a corpse around in circles like an idiot. Really like this, but here's my PSA to not kill zombies around your house unless you want to spend hours dragging them miles away. Corpse sickness is brutal in Build 42, and it only takes one zombie to bring you down now, so don't be a dipshit. Kite them away first, then kill them. Romero-like zombie spawn locations. I'm not 100% sure what this means, but I can tell you that the spawns do feel different. I'm not sure how to explain it though, it's just kind of like a vibe feeling, and it's off. Like, Rosewood doesn't feel crowded or congested when I walk down the streets on normal spawns. I also think they fixed the issues where dozens of zombies just spawn inside of doors, so maybe that's why. Overall, I'm indifferent on it. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just a change that we'll get used to. Alright, time for the real reason most of you are here. Combat. We need to talk about it. Mainly, the muscle strain mechanic, because, oh my god, is it something. Originally, I complained about this back during my initial testing pre-release back in November. Mainly because it affects every muscle in your body, right? Like, you can proc 3 times on each arm, each leg, your neck, your upper and lower torso, but fitness and strength don't have an influence on it for some reason. It's all tied to your individual weapon proficiency, which I hate more than anything. It'd be one thing if it was tied to strength and fitness, because when I think of muscle strain, I think working out or doing physical labor, and while I get that swinging a weapon falls under the physical labor portion, there's no reason that swinging a sledgehammer and swinging a hunting knife should have the same impact on my muscles. At level 0, you get muscle strain after 6 swings, or 3 swings and hopping a fence. Muscle strain impacts your swing speed and gives you pain. In your legs, it slows you down and can cause you to be more clumsy when climbing over obstacles. Again, this isn't tied to your fitness or strength at the moment, but rather your weapon proficiency. What this means is that if I get my axe skill up to level 10, it might take 20 swings before I experience the first stage of muscle strain. But if I swap over to long blunt, which is level 0, it'll fall right back to 6 swings. In my eyes, this was a feature primarily made to slow down the early game and nerf combat so that those of us who made a name for ourselves out of fighting zombies can't do that anymore. At least at the start. I don't want to be over dramatic about this. On the other hand, this forces you to be much more tactical with your engagements. You can't just walk out and fight 5 or 6 zombies at the start anymore, like you could in Build 41. It's a pretty massive change that definitely takes some getting used to. I can see myself dealing with it for a few challenge runs, but after that, this will likely be turned off in any future runs because I just hate it that much. To me, this is something that if you're a casual player who already struggles with combat, it's going to make it borderline impossible for you to do. So if you're one of those people, head into sandbox settings and turn it off. It's not worth the hassle. I do see both sides of this argument and have friends who are on both sides of it, but for me personally, I think it's stupid and it's not all tied to your fitness and strength levels, and even stupider that it doesn't scale across all combat forms, instead forcing you to rely on one specific combat style. This is something that's going to be turned off immediately for me. Alright, we made it through the entire checklist, and I just realized we didn't talk about the things like new traits or occupations, but to be honest, I don't really want to. The best thing about Project Zomboid is that there aren't any meta builds or playstyles. It's meant to be played 1,000 different ways by 1,000 different people. That's why I always hate those videos that are like, you need this build for Project Zomboid. No, you don't. Mess around with different traits and find a style that works for you. Especially in a new build. I will say, your normal builds that you run in 41 probably won't work. High Thirst is now only 1 point. Smoker is now only 2 points, so all those traits you used to stack for quote-unquote free points are addressed in this new build. That's not to say new ones won't be uncovered, but for now, it's best to just find an easy build that works for you, run with it, and enjoy the grind. For my final thoughts, I'll say that I came into this build incredibly skeptical, and I made it no secret for years, and after the months of testing and now playing the unstable release, I'm so damn happy I was wrong. Now, will multiplayer be solid and will they continue to expand on crafting? Oh, time will tell, but for now, I'm happy with where Build 42 is at and I'm excited to get to work on some new videos. Speaking of new videos, I'll be streaming pretty much every day for the rest of the week for a new 100 days video that I'm sure Rick is already going to have me beat on. But if you're a little nervous to get into Build 42, I'd like to remind you that it's unstable. You don't need to do it, and it shouldn't impact your Build 41 playthroughs as long as you don't load them while having the Build 42 beta open. With that though, I'm gonna get out of here. Let me know your thoughts on Build 42 Unstable so far, if you're enjoying it, what you love and what you hate, all that fun stuff. Until next time, I appreciate you all, Merry Christmas, and thanks for stopping by.